The Galactic Tribunal survived wars, invasions, and extinction-level debates. It did not survive one commander. Slapping a human, I worked with the Galactic Tribunal for 3 cycles now. Music right, 3 whole cycles of boring diplomatic nonsense, endless. Treaty negotiations and delegates. Arguing about trade routes like there. Discussing the meaning of existence. Itself but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed on station day 472, the day Commander Music, Vrel Talk decided to slap a human. My name is Plix, by the way, Junior Communications Officer. Corellian Fleet, which basically means I stand around looking official while important people talk, exciting stuff. Really, my job that day was simple. Record the proceedings, keep my mandibles shut, and try not to fall asleep during another round of Who Gets Mining Music Rights to the Zephron Asteroid Belt. Spoiler alert, I failed spectacularly at the sleeping part. Well, almost. The conference hall was one of those unnecessarily grand music spaces that the tribunal loved so much. Vaulted ceilings that stretched up forever, bioluminescent music panels casting this soft blue glow that was supposed to be calming but just made everyone look slightly dead. Music and a massive circular table that could seat 50 delegates comfortably. Today we had maybe 20 species represented, which sounds like music a lot until you realize that's actually a pretty small gathering for galactic standards. Commander Vrel looked sad at the head of the table naturally, because where else would he sit, right? The guy was 7 FT of scaled ego music, wrapped in decorative armor that probably cost more than my entire education. Corellians are impressive music to look at. I'll give us that. Crimson scales, twin crests that rise when we're agitated, and these piercing yellow music eyes that can apparently intimidate most species. The known galaxy, Vrel Talk had all of that, plus this air of superiority that made music you want to punch him even when he was being nice, which for the record was almost never. He'd been droning on for the better part of an hour about the Corellian Empire's glorious military history. And GT, music. And GT, our conquests, our technological superiority, blah blah blah, the usual propaganda. Most of the delegates were doing that thing where they nod politely while clearly thinking about music, what they're having for dinner. Zentari representative was actually cleaning her claws, not even subtle about it. Then music, the door opened and Thomas Raines walked in. Now I'd never seen a human in person before. Sure, I'd watched the briefing scene, the holographs, read the music reports about Earth being classified as a Class 12 death world, but reports don't really capture the reality of the thing, you know. Thomas Raines was tall for a human, maybe 6 FT, with this lean build. That didn't look particularly threatening at first glance. Dark hair starting to gray at the temples, these sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, music and wearing a simple black suit that was probably worth less than Vrel Talk's left boot. He moved into the room with this quiet confidence that immediately changed the atmosphere. No fanfare, no dramatic entrance, just a human walking to his designated seat, but every delegate that room turned to watch him, even they. Zentari stopped cleaning her claws. The human finally graces us with his presence, Vrel Talk announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm that could corrode Hull plating, how generous of you to join us, Mr. Rains. I trust your primitive navigation systems didn't cause too much delay, Thomas smiled. And GT, music. And GT actually smiled. My apologies. Commander, I was reviewing the latest casualty music reports from the Corellian border skirmishes. Took longer than expected, lots of names to read. Oh, that was smooth because everyone in that room knew the Corellian forces had been getting absolutely demolished in those skirmishes. 3 of music hour battle groups just gone, reduced to debris and distress signals. And GT, music. And GT. And here was this human apologizing for being late because he was reading the names of music are dead. The audacity was almost beautiful. Vreltalk's crests rose about music 2 in danger sign. I made a note in my data pad. Commander. Music agitated. Human delegate. Possibly suicidal, those skirmishes. Vreltalk said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that Corellians use right before they attack something, were unfortunate music, misunderstandings. Clearly, your species lacks the discipline to properly identify allied vessels in combat situation, music. Right, Thomas said, settling into his chair with infuriating casualness. Our fault entirely. I mean, sure, your ships opened fire first, entered Terran, protected music space without authorization, and ignored 17 hails requesting identification, but yeah. And GT, music. And GT, definitely a human error. We should probably apologize. Again, the Zentari delegate music made a chittering sound that I'm pretty sure was laughter. The Forian representative, this floating, jellyfish-looking creature, pulsed a shade of amused orange. Even the normally stoic Draxian music in the corner seemed to have his equivalent of a smirk. Vreltalk stood up, all 7 FT of wounded music, pride and scales. You dare mock the Corellian Empire? Your planet is barely out of its industrial age. You still use chemical propulsion. For half your spacecraft, you've been in space for what, 200 of your years? We've been exploring music. The stars for millennia. Thomas leaned back in his chair completely unbothered. That's true. We're pretty new to all this, still learning the ropes. And GT, music. And GT, making mistakes, accidentally defending our territory with excessive force. You know how it is with primitive species. We get jumpy. I was frantically recording everything because this was either going to be the most entertaining diplomatic music incident in tribunal history or the start of an actual war. Possibly both, probably both. Jumpy music, Vreltalk repeated, his voice now echoing through the chamber. Jumpy. And GT, music. And GT, is that what you call the unprovoked slaughter of Corellian peacekeeper? I call it self-defense, Thomas said, and his smile finally disappeared. But if you want to discuss slaughter, Commander, we can absolutely talk about what your peacekeepers' music were doing to the colony on Terran 7 before our jumpy fleet arrived. I've got footage, very detailed music footage. Want me to share it with everyone here? The room went dead silent. Like, absolutely no sound except for the ambient hum of the station's life support, 'cause apparently whatever happened on Terran 7 wasn't public knowledge yet. And GT, music. and GT, and Thomas Raines had just threatened to make it very public. Vrel talk scales actually flush darker, which in Corellians means pure music rage. His crests were fully extended now, his claws flexing on the table surface. Music, leaving little scratch marks in the fancy imported wood. I'd seen him like this once before, right before he ordered a ship captain to be thrown in the brig for bringing music, him cold Clathner juice. He walked around the table slowly, deliberately, every step echoed. Thomas didn't move, didn't even turn his head to track Vrel talk's approach. Just sat there, relaxed, like he was waiting for coffee to brew. You insects, Vrel talk hissed, now standing right behind Thomas's chair, are a plague on this galaxy, violent, irrational music, barely evolved primates who stumbled into space travel and somehow convinced yourselves you belong among civilized species. Thomas tilted his head slightly. Primates, actually not insects, common mistake. Music, we're carbon-based mammals from Earth, which, as you mentioned, is a death world. Bit of advice, Commander. You might want to remember that part. That's when Vrel talk made the mistake. His hand came up fast and sharp, and he slapped Thomas Raines across the face. Not a gentle tap either, a full force armored hand. I'm going to teach you. Respect kind of slap that echoed through the entire conference hall like a thunderclap, the kind of slap that would have sent most species sprawling to the floor, possibly unconscious, definitely injured. Thomas's head snapped to the side from the impact. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then very slowly, very deliberately, he turned his head back to face forward. The entire room held its breath. 20 music, different species, all frozen, all watching. I had my recording device pointed straight at them, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped music. The thing, the Zentari delegate, had actually backed away from the table. The Forian had gone pale, music white, which I didn't even know was possible for their species. Thomas raised one hand, touched music, the blood at his lip, looked at it on his fingers. His expression was completely calm, eerily calm, but his eyes, oh by all the stars in the void, his eyes had changed. There was something in them now that hadn't been there before, something old and primal and absolutely music. Terrifying. 5 seconds, I remember thinking. That's how long we all stood there, frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. And GT, music. And GT, 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Commander Vrel talk still standing behind Thomas, still with his hand music raised, seemed to realize that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a critical error in judgment. 5 seconds, that's all it took for everything music to change. Okay, so here's the thing about moments that change your entire understanding of the universe. They happen fast, like stupidly music fast. Blink and you miss it fast, but somehow your brain records them in this weird slow motion detail. That music you can replay forever, whether you want to or not. Trust me, I've replayed these 5 seconds about 10,000 times in my head, and it doesn't get less terrifying. Second 1, Thomas's face changed. That's the only way I can describe it. Really, it wasn't like he got angry, scared, or anything that simple. No. Something deeper shifted, something that had been sleeping under all that music. Diplomatic politeness and forced smiles. His pupils dilated just a fraction. Music and his breathing changed, became slower, more controlled. The muscles in his jaw tightened, and I swear on my ancestral scales, music, the temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. You know that feeling when you're a hatchling and you wander into music cave that turns out to be occupied by something that sees you as lunch, that primal oh void. I made a horrible mistake feeling that hits you right in the survival instinct. Yeah, that's what every single being in that conference hall felt in second one, including I. Noticed Commander Veltak himself, the human's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of his chair, went very still, not tense, not clenched, just still, like a predator that stopped moving because it's decided you're prey and there's no point wasting energy before the strike. And GT, music. And GT, his head tilted maybe half an inch, and he looked up at Veltak with an expression that was somehow completely music, blank and absolutely full of promise at the same time. Commander, Thomas said, and his voice was different, now lower with this edge that made it sound less like talking and more like the moment before an explosion. That was unwise. Second to Veltak's crests, which had been fully extended in his dominant display, suddenly flattened. Music against his skull. I'd never seen him do that, not once in 3 cycles of serving under him. Crest flattening is what music Korathians do when we're genuinely afraid, when our biology overrides our ego and screams at us to run. His yellow eyes went wide, and I watched music, his throat work as he swallowed hard. That is, perhaps I was too hasty. Veltak stammered, actually stammered, taking a step backward. His music armored boot scraped against the floor with this pathetic scraping sound. The strike was merely a gesture of discipline. Music, standard in Korathian military culture. Nothing personal, certainly nothing that requires music, but Thomas was already moving. Actually, no, that's not accurate. Thomas was already music. Standing. I didn't see him get up. 1 second he was sitting in that chair. The next second, music, he was on his feet, facing Veltak, and I have absolutely no memory of the transition music between those two states. It was like watching edited footage with frames missing. Except this was real life happening right in front of my face. The Zentari delegate shrieked this high-pitched alarm call that her species makes when music they sense imminent death. Forian started pulsing emergency red, flooding the room with warning bioluminescence. The Draxian, who I'd thought was basically fearless, launched himself music out of his chair so fast he knocked it over, scrambling for the exit. Security, someone shouted. Might have been me, actually. Security to Conference Hall 7 immediately. Code Violet. Repeat. Code Violet. Music. Code Violet, by the way, means lethal force authorized. All delegates evacuate. Something very bad is happening right now. And GT, music. And GT, we'd never used Code Violet before. The tribunal had been operational for 60 standard years, and we'd never once needed Code Violet until today, until a Korathian commander slapped a human. Second 3. Thomas moved, and listen. I need you to understand music. Something about Deathworld physiology versus standard galaxy biology. Okay. Most species we evolved on reasonable planets, normal gravity, reasonable atmospheric pressure, predators that music kill you with venom or claws or Sensible thing we didn't need to develop crazy reflexes or extreme strength or any of that. We got smart. Instead built tools, formed societies. Very civilized humans evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill them every single day. Gravity 1.3 times galactic standard, atmosphere so rich in oxygen that their biochemistry runs like an overclocked fusion reactor. Predators that could rip them apart. Weather music that could freeze or cook them, diseases that should have wiped them out completely, and they didn't just survive, they thrived. And GT, music. And GT, they became apex predators on a planet full of apex predator. So when Thomas moved, he moved with speed and precision that music my Korathian eyes couldn't even properly track. His right hand came up in a blur, fingers extended, aimed not at Veltak's torso music or arms, but directly at his throat. Combat training, obvious combat training, the kind of movement music you only learn through years of practice and actual battlefield experience. Veltak tried to react, tried to bring his own hands up in defense, but he was so slow. Compared music to the human, it was like watching someone swim through thick gel while Thomas was cutting through vacuum. No resistance, no hesitation, just pure efficient violence. The human strike had about 15 inches of travel distance, maybe less. Shouldn't have been enough force to do serious damage. Right, basic physics, but here's what I learned later from the medical examiner's report that I definitely wasn't supposed to read. Humans have this thing called fast twitch muscle fiber density that's about 3 times higher music than Korathian standard. Their bones are reinforced with a mineral matrix that's stronger than most commercial ceramics. And when they're in danger, their endocrine system floods their body with these performance music enhancing chemicals that kill a normal species outright. Thomas's hand hit Veltak's throat with approximately 900 pounds of force, concentrated into an area about 2 inches square. The reinforced music tracheal plates that Korathians are so proud of, the ones that are supposed to protect us from most physical attacks, might as well have been decorative paper. Second, 4, the security doors burst open and 3 armed guards rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting orders that nobody was listening to. The Centauri delegate had reached the emergency exit, was hammering on the override panel with all 4 of her manipulator music limbs. Half the other delegates were huddled in the far corner of the room, making distressed noises in about 12 different languages. I was still frozen at my station. And GT, music. And GT, recording device clutched in my trembling hands, watching everything unfold with the detached horror of someone who knows music. There, witnessing something that will haunt them forever. My training said I should evacuate, should run, should do music. Literally anything except stand there like an idiot, but I couldn't move. Couldn't look away, couldn't do anything except music. Watch. Thomas's strike had connected, his hand buried in Veltak's throat up to the wrist, and the commander's eyes had gone from wide with fear to wider with shock to just music, just empty. There was a wet, crunching sound that my audio sensors picked up perfectly. Thank you very much, brain. I definitely wanted that. Memory preserved in crystal clarity. Blood, dark purple Korathian music. Blood was spreading across Veltak's Decorative armor in a pattern that looked almost music artistic. Human pulled his arm back, smooth and controlled, no wasted motion. Veltax. Body started to fall backward, still. Standing music. Like someone had suddenly turned off gravity, but only for him. His hands came up to his music throat. Instinctive, trying to stop what was already done. The security guards were halfway across the room now, weapons raised, targeting lasers, painting red dots. Music on Thomas's chest. Freeze. Do not move. Hands where we can see them. Thomas held his hands up. Immediately, palms out, fingers spread. Compliant, completely calm, like he'd just finished signing a treaty. Music. Instead of, the other thing. There was blood on his right hand. Purple against his pale skin, dripping onto the expensive imported floor. Music. Understood, Thomas said to the guards, his voice steady, professional. Like he was confirming dinner reservations. Music. I am not resisting. The situation is under control. Under control. Stars above. The situation was under control. A human diplomat. Music had just killed a Korathian commander in the middle of the galactic tribunal, and he was calmly informing security. Music that everything was fine. Second 5. Tack's head came off, just came off. Separated from his music body with this horrible tearing sound that I'm going to hear in my nightmares until the day I die. Turns music out when you crush someone's trachea and sever their spinal column and rupture their carotid artery with a single strike. The structural integrity of the neck area is somewhat compromised. The weight of the head and GT music and GT combined with Veltax backward momentum combined with the station's artificial gravity. Just music finished what Thomas had started. Head hit the floor first, rolled once, twice, came to rest facing the conference table with those yellow eyes still wide open, still shocked. The body followed a second later, collapsing in a heap of expensive armor, music, and royal insignia, and all that Korathian pride that apparently couldn't stop a Deathworld human from literally taking his head off. Music. Then the chaos really started. The Zentari delegate finally got the emergency exit open and practically threw herself through it, screaming the whole way. The Forian passed out, just dropped to the floor like a deflated balloon. There, bioluminescence going dark. Music. The Draxian was shouting into his comm unit about invoking emergency war protocols. 2 other delegates. Music were being sick in the corner, which smelled absolutely delightful, let me tell you. The security guards. Music had Thomas surrounded now, weapons pressed against his head, his chest, his back. He didn't resist, didn't fight, just stood there with his hands up, breathing slowly, while Commander Vel. Music. Tack's blood pooled around his feet. I invoke diplomatic immunity under Terran law, Thomas said calmly. And GT, music. And GT, and request immediate contact with the Earth Embassy. I am surrendering peacefully to tribunal authority. Music. And will cooperate fully with the investigation. One of the guards, a Yarthian female with her weapon shaking in her tentacles. Music managed to gasp out, what investigation? You just murdered a commander. Thomas turned his head slightly to look at her, careful not to make any sudden movements. Self-defense. He struck me first. It's on recording. Officer Plix has been documenting. Music, the entire proceedings, and that's when every eye In the room turned to me, Junior. Communications Officer Plix still. Standing there like a statue. And GT, music. And GT, still clutching my recording device. Still trying to process the fact that I just watched a human remove music. Someone's head with his bare hands in. Less time than it takes to complete a hyperspace calculation. Yes, I have. Footage, I heard myself say, my voice. Coming out all wrong, too high, too shaky. Complete footage of the entire music incident from multiple angles. Time-stamped, encrypted everything. Music, the head security officer, a Korathian named Drax who I'd served with for 2 cycles, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen music before, fear mixed with disbelief mixed with something that might have been respect. Plix, secure that footage. Immediately, make 17 copies, distribute them to Tribunal Command, Legal Division and all embassy representatives. Do it now. I nodded. Fumbled with the device, started the transfer protocols. My hands were still shaking so badly I mistyped the encryption code 3 times before getting it right. Music. Thomas was being led away in restraints now. Heavy-duty ones designed for high-threat individuals. Music, surrounded by dozen guards who all kept their weapons trained on him like he might explode at any moment. He caught my eye as they passed, gave me the smallest nod like we. Music, were colleagues acknowledging each other in a hallway. Thank you for your diligence, Officer Plix, he said. Accurate documentation. Music is essential for justice. Then he was gone, the doors sealed behind him, and I was left alone in Conference Hall 7 with a headless music body, traumatized collection of delegates, and the growing realization that everything I thought I knew about the galaxy's music power structure had just been violently revised 5 seconds. That's all it took for a human to music kill a Korathian commander and change the course of interstellar politics forever. 5 seconds. That music I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to forget and knowing I never would. Station lockdown happened about music 30 seconds after Thomas left the room. Blast doors slammed shut throughout the entire tribunal complex. And GT, music. And GT, sealing every section, every corridor, every docking bay. Red emergency lighting flooded the halls, and the automated announcement music system started blaring in 17 languages about security protocols and mandatory confinement to quarters, fun times. Really, music. Nothing says intergalactic diplomacy like being trapped in a glorified space can. While music, everyone panics. I got assigned to witness interview duty, which was just fantastic for my music mental state, let me tell you, because apparently recording the actual incident wasn't enough trauma for one day. No, I also got to spend the next 6 hours listening to 20 different beings describe music, what they'd seen, and here's the fun part, no 2 accounts matched, not even close. The Zentari delegate insisted Thomas had used some kind of concealed weapon, possibly a molecular blade hidden in his sleeve, because no organic being could possibly music move that fast or strike with that much force. She was absolutely certain, kept chittering about it. Demanded music, a full-body scan of the human to locate the hidden technology. The Forian, once music they'd recovered from passing out, claimed Thomas had exhibited clear signs of combat stimulant use, said his pupils were dilated, his reaction time was chemically enhanced and no natural biology could produce that level of performance without artificial augmentation. They wanted a full toxicology screen, biological sampling. The works, music the Draxian bless. His paranoid little heart was convinced. The whole thing was a setup, said. Vriltok must have been in on it, that this was some elaborate Terran plot to intimidate the Galactic Council into submission. He was demanding investigations into collusion, conspiracy, maybe even suggesting that Vriltok was actually still alive somewhere, and this was music, all theater. Yeah, sure, buddy. The head on the floor was just really committed. Acting. My favorite was the Polonian trade minister who swore, absolutely swore, that Thomas had moved so fast he'd briefly phased out of normal space-time, claimed there was a shimmer effect like reality itself had. Hiccuped one of the music stations. Temporal sensors reviewed for chronological anomalies. I documented everything, nodded politely, and tried not to scream music, because what I'd seen, what my recording device had captured in perfect detail, was much simpler and somehow much worse than any of their theories. Thomas Raines was music, just a human, no weapons, no drugs, no time manipulation, just biology training and 5 seconds of music violence that our civilized galaxy wasn't prepared to comprehend. The real bombshell came when Earth Embassy finally sent over Thomas's personnel file. And GT, music. And GT. I was sitting in the investigator office, surrounded by senior tribunal officials, music. When they opened the classified section, my mandibles actually dropped, which is embarrassing, but honestly understandable given the circumstances. Thomas Raines wasn't just music, a diplomat. Well, he was now, but that was basically retirement for him. Before joining the diplomatic music corps, he'd spent 22 years in something called Terran Special Operations Command. The file had pictures of him younger, harder, wearing military gear that looked designed for environments that would kill most species outright, combat decorations from conflicts I'd never heard of on planets I couldn't pronounce, training certifications in hand-to-hand combat, music, insurgency tactics, hostage extraction, covert operations. One of the officials. And GT, music. And GT, a Yarthian legal advisor named Kelmoth. Read through the file with increasing horror. He's killed before many times. This human has over 40 confirmed music combat eliminations, close quarters, personal. Why, by all the void's mercy, would Earth send someone like this to a diplomatic summit? Because, I said, surprising myself by actually speaking up, they probably thought we'd be civilized enough not to physically assault their representative. Kelmoth looked at me like I just suggested the universe was actually flat, but Commander Vriltok was asserting dominance. It's standard music practice in Korathian culture, a simple disciplinary strike on a Deathworlder. And GT, music. And GT, I pointed out, a trained Deathworlder soldier who spent 2 decades in combat zones. And GT, music. And GT, what did we think would happen? Turns out nobody had thought about it at all. That was the problem. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 18 hours after the incident. Every major species had representatives there. And GT, music. and GT, either in person or via holo conference. The chamber was packed, standing room only, which I'd never seen before. Everyone wanted to watch the human explain himself, wanted to see if he'd show remorse, fear, anything that would. Music makes sense in their cultural context. Thomas was brought in wearing diplomatic attire again, perfectly pressed like music. The previous days, violence had been a minor inconvenience. The restraints were still on him, but he walked calmly, music between his guards, nodded respectfully to the council speaker, and took his position at the defendant's podium without being told. Music, the Korathian delegation, was present in force, all of them wearing mourning colors, all of them radiating barely contained fury. Vriltak's clutch brother, a general, music named Kraxith, stood as the primary accuser. His crests were fully extended, his scales flushed, music dark with rage. This creature, Kraxith hissed, pointing one clawed finger. Music at Thomas, murdered a decorated commander of the Korathian Empire in cold blood. He tore music my clutch brother's head from his body like a feral beast. There can be no excuse, no justification. We demand immediate execution. The chamber erupted in murmurs, some agreeing, music, some protesting. The council speaker, an ancient Valorian whose species had been mediating disputes since music before most of us achieved spaceflight, raised one manipulator for silence. Accused will now make his statement. She, music announced, her voice carrying that weird resonance that Valerians use for official pronouncements. Thomas, reigns of earth, you stand accused, music, of murder. How do you answer? Thomas stood quiet for a moment, looking around the chamber at all the assembled species, all the delegates who'd never music met a human before yesterday. When he spoke, his voice was clear, measured, completely calm. I answer that I acted in self-defense, as is my right under both Terran law and Galactic Tribunal. Music Charter Section 4, subsection 12, which protects all sentient beings from physical assault during diplomatic proceedings. He struck you once. Kraxith roared, one disciplinary blow. You responded with lethal force. That is not proportional. That is not defense. Music, that is murder. Thomas turned to face the Korathian directly. General, with respect, you're applying your cultural context to a species you don't understand. In Korathian society, a superior striking a subordinate is normal, expected, even. And GT, music. And GT, but humans aren't Korathians. We evolved differently. Our biology works differently. Biology is not an excuse for savagery. No, Thomas agreed, but it is an explanation. Humans evolved as persistence predators on a high-gravity, high-oxygen world. Our threat response is hardwired into our nervous system at a level that bypasses conscious music thought. When Commander Vriltak struck me, my body interpreted that as a lethal threat, not music because I decided it was a threat, because 200,000 years of evolution decided it was a threat. The council speaker leaned music forward. Interested, explain this threat. Response, Thomas nodded. When a human perceives music, danger, our adrenal glands release a cascade of hormones. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, music, cortisol. Our heart rate increases, our muscles receive increased blood flow, and oxygen, our pain threshold rises. And GT, music. GT, our reaction time decreases, our strength output increases by approximately 40%. Music. All of this happens automatically in milliseconds without conscious control. He paused, making eye contact music with various delegates around the chamber, and here's the critical part. On Earth, if something is close enough to touch you, it's close enough to kill you. Our predators didn't announce their intentions, they didn't negotiate. Music, they struck fast and without warning, so we adapted. We learned to respond to physical contact from perceived threats with immediate, overwhelming force, because the alternative was death. You're saying you couldn't control yourself, Kelmoth asked from the legal section, that you had no choice. I'm saying that by the time my conscious mind processed what was happening, my body had already responded. The strike that killed Commander Vriltok was executed by instinct. Music by training, by biological imperative. Could I have stopped it? Maybe, but that would have required overriding millions of years of evolution in a fraction of a second. The chamber went silent. You could music have heard a scale drop. Thomas continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, and frankly, I shouldn't have had to stop it. Commander Vriltok assaulted me during a diplomatic summit. He violated every protocol we have for peaceful interaction. He put his hands on a representative of a species he knew nothing about, from a planet he'd never bothered music to study, and he paid the price for that ignorance. This is outrageous, Kraxith shouted. You're murder with biology. No, music, Thomas said quietly. I'm explaining cause and effect. Your brother made a choice. He chose violence. I responded to that violence in the only way my species knows how. This isn't murder, General. This is what happens when you slap a Deathworlder. Music. The tribunal reviewed the footage next, all 17 angles of it, frame by frame. Everyone watched Vriltok's approach, his aggressive posture, his escalating threats. Everyone watched the slap, the sound echoing through the playback. Everyone watched Thomas's face change, watched those 5 seconds unfold in horrifying detail. The medical examiner presented music findings. The strike that killed Vriltok was executed with precision. That indicated extensive training. Music. The angle of impact, the force distribution, the target music selection, all of it pointed to someone who knew exactly how to kill efficiently. But music, and this was the important part, there was no hesitation, no wind-up, no preparation. It was purely reactive music, exactly as Thomas had claimed. A xenobiologist from the Polonian Institute testified about Deathworld adaptations, explaining how species music from high-threat environments develop enhanced reflexes, increased muscle density, aggressive threat responses. She brought up examples from other known Deathworlds, showed comparisons, made it clear that humans weren't unique in this regard, just uniquely effective. The debate went music on for hours. The Corellian delegation demanded justice, called for execution, threatened to withdraw from the tribunal entirely. And GT, music. And GT, other species argued for leniency, pointed out the legal protections, questioned why Vriltok had been allowed to make physical contact in the first place. Finally, after 6 hours of arguments and counterarguments and music, legal citations that made my Head hurt, the council speaker called. For a vote, the ruling came music down. Narrow, but it came down, self-defense. Thomas Raines was guilty of excessive force but not murder. He was to be expelled from music, the tribunal, banned from diplomatic service, and remanded to Terran custody with a formal reprimand. Music, but he wouldn't be executed, wouldn't even face imprisonment. Craxi stormed out, his entire delegation following. The Corellian Empire lodged a formal protest, recalled their ambassadors, and shut down 3 trade agreements. It caused a diplomatic incident that lasted months. Music, but here's the thing that really mattered, the thing that changed everything. The council issued new protocols, official guidelines for interaction with Death World species. Rule number 1, printed in bold text, translated into every known language: do not initiate music, physical contact with humans without explicit permission and clear understanding of consequences. They created a whole new classification: species music, non-contact, high threat. Response: humans were the first on the list, but other Death World species got added quickly after. Formal training became mandatory for anyone working with Terran representatives, cultural sensitivity courses, biology briefings, threat assessment protocols. Music, I helped design some of those courses. Actually, turns out being the guy who recorded everything made me a valuable resource. Music. I gave lectures, showed the footage with appropriate warnings, explained what I'd witnessed, watched music. The delegates from 100 species learned the same lesson I'd learned the hard way: never touch a Deathworlder. It's been 2 cycles since that day now. And GT, music. And GT, 2 full cycles, and I still think about it constantly. Still see Vrel talks. Music, head rolling across that floor. Still hear Thomas's calm voice explaining evolution and music. Instinct, like he was discussing weather patterns. The galaxy's different now, more careful. And GT, music. And GT, we ask permission before handshakes. We maintain distance during negotiations. We remember music, that not every species shares our assumptions about personal space and appropriate contact. Thomas Raines retired from public service. Entirely went back to Earth. Disappeared. Music, into whatever life form our soldiers live when they're done with violence. I hope it's peaceful. I hope he found whatever passes for peace in a species that evolved from persistence predators. Music. As for me, I got promoted junior communications officer to senior diplomatic historian. They figured someone should document music, these lessons properly, make sure future generations understand what happened and why. So that's what I do now. I teach young officers about cultural differences, music about biological imperatives, about the day a Corellian commander learned the hardest lesson. Music, the galaxy. Some species think we've become too cautious, too afraid of humans and other death music worlders. They complain about the protocols, the restrictions, the careful distance we maintain. They say we're being paranoid. I just show them the footage, all 5 seconds of it, watch their faces change as they realize what they're seeing. Watch them understand that sometimes paranoia is just pattern recognition. 1 slap, 5 seconds, 1 death in the entire galaxy learned to keep its hands to itself. Funny how education works. Sometimes music